Well, good morning and welcome to Beyond Disaster Recovery, a holistic approach to disruption mitigation. First off, we trust you and your families are safe and well during these very challenging times. I know we're all hoping for a safe and a short recovery, not only from the health crisis, but from this business disruption as well. We think you'll find this webinar both relevant and timely. I don't think any of us had a pandemic in our 2020 business plans, and probably not in our DR plans either. At DataBank, we know you're focused on your health and the health of your families. And of course, nothing is more important than family. So we appreciate you taking time away to be with us today. That said, we still have to keep our applications and our businesses up and running so we can take care of our families. And you need to make sure you're open for business. And that's why we're here today. Just like everything in IT, disaster recovery continues to evolve. The old label of disaster recovery no longer fits because most of us only associate this term with natural disasters. This term, the approach, the execution, the outcomes really no longer meet our need for uptime, and they don't take into account the new and the emerging challenges that we face. A holistic approach is being able to plan for any disruption, not just natural disasters. The outcome we all want and need is continuous availability, and today we're going to show you how to get there. First off, let me introduce myself. I'm Dane Dittemore, and I'll be your host today. I'm honored to introduce today's speakers. First off, we have Phil Riker. Phil is DataBank's Vice President of Engineering, and he manages our engineering teams that support our cloud and data protection solutions. Robert Bird is a cloud account executive for Zerto, and he's instrumental in the DataBank Zerto partnership, helping to bring the latest and greatest developments to DataBank's solutions. John Cousins is a cloud architect with Zerto, and not only an expert in Zerto's solution, but a cloud-based IT resilience as well. As for the agenda today, I'll kick us off by talking a little bit about the DataBank Zerto partnership, as well as a historical perspective of disaster recovery to kind of set the stage. Robert will then discuss this thing we call IT resilience, and John will walk us through the power of the Zerto platform and specifically how it helps protect you from disruption. And we'll round out the discussion with DataBank's own Phil Riker, who will walk us through disaster recovery as a service and DataBank's solution. And finally, we'll give our audience an opportunity to ask questions, which we will field via chat. Obviously, you were muted on entry, so a couple of housekeeping items. First off, if you haven't been muted, if you would please do that, that would, so as not to disturb our other attendees, we would appreciate that. Secondly, you should all have access to chat. So be thinking of questions you want to ask, or go ahead and put your questions in chat, and we'll handle some of those at the end of our presentation. And then finally, if you need to leave the webinar early for some reason, maybe you have a child care issue, pets, other people in your household that need attention, please send an email to webinars@databank.com with any questions, or if you'd like to be contacted, we can also send you a link to the recording so you can watch it later. Before we get started on the details, I think it's important for us to talk about the strength of the partnership that exists between DataBank and Zerto. We often hear it takes a village, and that's what DataBank and Zerto together in partnership bring to you. We're two industry leaders that together deliver proven recoverability as a service that is secure, compliant, and holistic. Although the numbers are significant and the stats, the important takeaway is that you benefit from the collective scale and expertise of our two companies. DataBank has the geographically diverse data centers to replicate to and recover from, and Zerto's software platform is undeniably the best in the industry in managing workloads. In this case, the whole is truly greater than the sum of the parts. So what we see when we speak with organizations of all types is that their needs have changed. Infrastructure has evolved, but unfortunately the outcomes have not. In order for any of us to understand where we are and where we need to go, I think it's important to understand where we've been. And we believe that seeing disaster recovery through the lens of a historical perspective will help set you on the path to success. Quite simply, and as we all know, our needs have changed. Who moved my cheese, right? We've gone from some applications being critical to everything being business critical. In the not so distant past, protection was generally limited to back office mission critical applications, and as we know, much was left unprotected. And then fast forward to today, obviously the circle on the right there, everything is business critical. Protection really for our online applications, everything is pretty much online, even though we might have brick and mortar. If you fast forward to today, you know, really the old ways don't work anymore. Any application that impacts the customer experience requires protection against disruption. We all share the same goal: an uninterrupted customer experience, and continuous availability is how we get there. So this is what we know. We've gone from physical servers to virtualization to the software-defined data center, and of course, clouds of all types, which, by the way, is essentially an outsourced service bureau model that IBM started way back in 1932. They started the original timeshare, if you can believe that. And a fun fact is that IBM invented virtualization in 1976, over 40 years ago. So when you think about it, we've really come full circle rather than a stair step. So infrastructure has evolved, but the outcomes have not. In the beginning, companies backed up to tape. As you know, we flew or we drove to a remote data center. We used equipment owned by somebody else, and then we tried to restore from that tape backup. And the challenges are obvious. There weren't a lot of options for data center facilities, so we had to either build our own, which were costly, or rent space from a service provider, which weren't widely available back then. For any of us that were around in the early days, you might remember when a T1 cost over $1,000 a month, right? So bandwidth was expensive. Connectivity was expensive, generally speaking. And also back in the day, you had a 3-ring binder to use as a run book. And of course, that was outdated as soon as you put it on the shelf. And the outcomes, as you might guess, were costly and ineffective. An important note here that I'll make, historically, disaster recovery and disaster recovery solutions were only available to the largest companies with the biggest budgets and the ability to pay for it. I think what you'll see today is that solutions are widely available and affordable for small to mid-sized businesses, and that's what we're going to cover today. So as infrastructure evolved, virtualization became more prevalent. And you might say to yourself, Dane, you said virtualization started back in the 70s. Well, back in the 70s, it was really IBM's platforms like the Z series and the I series, et cetera. But what we're talking about going forward here is the x86 platform. So we're still challenged. Secondary data center options were expensive. We still had no executable plan. We still hadn't solved the runbook problem. And above all, we still lacked the skill and the expertise. And the outcomes, well, the outcomes were very much the same. We still failed to recover, but we failed more quickly. And then as infrastructure evolved, we solved a couple of the key challenges of the past, those being slow networks, high bandwidth. The data center, renting data center space is now widely available and affordable. And data center providers now offer the rental of resource pools, so we solved the equipment problem. But notice that we still have an outdated run book and lack of expertise. So we haven't really automated anything. Everything's still pretty much on paper, and we still remain relatively unprepared. And the outcomes, of course, were and have been much the same, but in some cases even worse. And finally, infrastructure has evolved. Now we have all the cloud choices anybody could want. And unfortunately, we're faced with a whole new set of challenges, things like ransomware, security, privacy, but even more relevant are the two items in the middle. We thought outsourcing would relieve us of our responsibility, but we're finding that really nothing could be further from the truth. With all this, we've come to know is that we never really solved the challenges of old, and now we're faced with a whole new set. And in the end, the outcomes have been worse in many cases. And that's why we're here today, to help you solve it and position you for the future. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Robert Bird, who will talk about IT resilience.
All right, thanks, Dane. Appreciate that. So IT resilience, right? So at Zerto, our whole mantra, our whole philosophy is basically around empowering IT resilience, empowering our MSPs like DataBank to be able to provide a solution that really equips organizations to be truly IT resilient. And the reason that DR has evolved into IT resiliency is because we really now have to solve for a whole new set of challenges in addition to the planned and the unplanned disruptions of the past. Next slide, please. All right, so disruptions, right? Disruptions are not just natural disasters, and we really need to move away from that mindset, and a lot of what we do is really evangelizing that, right? We need to mitigate against all risks that cause disruptions, right? Both the planned and the unplanned, right? When we're looking at unplanned disruptions, we're typically accustomed to those natural disasters there at the bottom, but really it's evolved into much more. Ransomware, security vulnerabilities, user errors, and then when we're looking at the planned that cause disruptions in business organizations today, we look at cloud migrations, data center consolidations, general maintenance and upgrades, et cetera. So we really need to mitigate against all of these risks and disruptions. We know that we will have outages and disruptions, right? We may not categorize it as an actual disaster, but we know bad things happen and that affects systems and productions. We also know that we have to have an executable plan, not just a plan on paper, sitting on a shelf, but an actual executable plan before the outage occurs. And before you do anything, you really need to ensure your recoverability strategy is aligned with the business stakeholders. Many times, the IT strategy is not really in alignment with the business, and that causes some significant delay in your ability to put something into place, right? So what does the business expect? What does the business need? And what can the business truly afford? Technical solutions are in abundance, but the high-level business discussions with the internal stakeholders is actually often missed. So in some cases, you may not be aware of what you need to protect. If you're on the technical side of the house, you can't really assume what those systems are, right? For example, if the senior managers have determined that loyalty programs are strategically important to the business, but you assume only back-end office systems are mission critical, then there's an obvious gap there. And then obviously, right, we've seen a lot of this, organizations having to completely pivot to work from home. Many organizations and businesses did not have a plan in place to really pivot to their entire workforce working from home. And so now where does that fit in when we're looking at disruptions moving forward? And so what does IT resilience really include? And it really is, a combination of all of these elements. So we not only need a plan, we not only need a plan that covers all of those risks, but also all of these elements, right? Those being physical and the logical elements that encompass it, right? So what I mean by this is we're typically good at picking the right product technically, which would be hardware, software, or a combination. But what we're not so good at is understanding how to evaluate a holistic solution that may need to include things like location, renting versus doing it yourself infrastructure, the ongoing people that support the component, and ultimately, you need to look at the total cost of ownership, or maybe more accurately, the total cost of operation. And so this is straight from Gartner, right? On what they have concluded as the requirements for IT resiliency. And so what they're saying here is it must include, first and foremost, The IT resilience must include closely continuous IT and business operations. We address that with continuous data protection, right? We're not a snapshot-based solution, nor is a service that DataBank provides. It is a multifunction converged product segment, right, that has evolved from backup, disaster recovery, runbook automation, replication, orchestration, etc. Right? And its scope must really include multi-data center and multi-cloud mobility and protection. And lastly, functionality to include IT operations resilience, cyber attack mitigation, be able to respond to potentially disruptive events in order to sustain those business and IT operations. And with that, I would like to now turn it over to John Cousins, where we'll take a deeper look at the power of Zerto, from a high level and then from a technical perspective as well.
Oh, thanks, Rob. I appreciate it. So today I'm just here to talk to you a little high level technically about the power of Zerto and how we revolutionize the business continuity and disaster recovery space. So here at a high level is how Zerto, what it would look like from an architecture perspective. So only a decade ago, replication in enterprise virtualized environments was all done at the storage layer, right? And you were locked into replicating between like storage arrays in both environments. You'd have to have a really expensive array in your production environment and possibly another expensive one sitting in DR that was somewhat idle, just receiving replicas, excuse me. So this was a really expensive solution. It meant that you couldn't mix and match your arrays, right? You couldn't have one vendor on one side and a cheaper vendor on the other side. You had to have like for like in both locations. It was very complicated and complex to set up. You had to set up replication per LUN, which meant that you had to organize all of your virtual machines onto those LUNs, knowing that they were going to be replicated to the other side. It was very complex and not very granular as well. It even required a separate orchestration and automation software, like VMware Site Recovery Manager, for instance, and it was only VMware to VMware integration, right? So if you had a Hyper-V in the environment and you needed to replicate to VMware, there was no options for that, or no orchestration options for that at least. And you could never really realize all of the benefits of virtualization because you were tied into those physical layers, right? So Zerto revolutionized the market by moving replication into the hypervisor layer rather than in the physical layer, right? To really take on that software-defined data center approach. We included all of the recovery, orchestration, and automation, removing the need for a separate solution, and enabled simplicity of being able to protect your VMs on a per VM basis. So how does Zerto work? It's essentially two components: a Zerto Virtual Manager, which is just a Windows component on both sides. It ties directly into your VMware Virtual Center or your System Center Virtual Machine Manager if you're a Hyper-V environment. And it installs in minutes. It's very fast. To get ZVM up and running, it's about 10 to 15 minutes to get up and running in your environment. Once deployed, we deploy virtual replication appliances to each of your hypervisor hosts. So this is our scale out architecture. You automatically have one for each host. So if a host goes down or if you have to vMotion VMs to another host, the other virtual replication appliances can pick up the job and basically continue replicating to the other side. Big takeaways from this as well is that there's no impact to production. So this is block level replication. There's no snapshots being taken in the VMware environment, and there's no agents installed into the production Windows or Linux virtual machines. So very seamless to the customer. They don't even really know that replication is happening in the back end. And the big thing to take away as well is that it's always on replication. So not synchronous, but near synchronous. So just post-write, we're basically compressing data and sending it to the other side. And then what we're doing is storing that in what's called a journal. And a journal is simply just a log of all changes that are occurring of your replicating virtual machines. You have one journal per every virtual machine that's replicating. And then it offers you seconds of granularity. So a TiVo-like experience to be able to roll back your virtual machines to 5 to 10 second checkpoints. And then basically you have the ability to set SLAs as well from anywhere from 1 hour up to 30 days, keeping those 5 to second checkpoints. So Zerto, basically this is the three core pillars of IT resilience, right? This is somewhat defined by Gartner as well. The first pillar being continuous availability, so always on replication for an always on customer experience. So, you know, protecting you from any outages, disruptions, ransomware attacks, or just, you know, just complete data protection if you even need long-term retention needs, right? Workload mobility is being able to easily move applications and workloads without risks while being protected. So this could be consolidations and migrations of data centers, possibly upgrading your infrastructure. So you need to buy new storage arrays and new servers. So you need to migrate workloads somewhere temporarily while doing so. And then also having the ability to spin off copies of your production workloads for testing, DevOps, any kind of testing that you need an identical copy of production to make sure that you're not going to affect your production environment before going live. And then multi-cloud agility, the ability to move from and between any cloud and being able to come back out of it as well, right? So no Hotel California effect, being able to replicate into the public cloud as well and being able to come back out again. So, you know, there's a lot of solutions that can get you into the cloud. There's not a lot that can get you back out again. So this slide right here is a pretty good representation of different impacts of outages in the marketplace. So this is taking a company with $100 million revenue, and we have a tool called a business downtime calculator where you can plug in about 5 metrics, and it'll basically tell you the impact of a downtime. So once you start running it, it'll just start calculating how much revenue you're losing. So the first category up here is probably more of a storage replication, or not storage replication. This is probably a backup, right? So you're taking a backup every 24 hours. Typically, they're VMware snapshot based. If you have to recover from a backup, you're either pulling them off of a slow network device or from tape, like old school methods. And this typically takes about 24 hours just to recover, right? So you're down for about 48 hours. So that impact to that customer is $821,000 for being down that length of time. The next best thing we started doing was, which I spoke of earlier, is SAN-based replication, right? So maybe you're taking a snapshot of your SAN every 4 hours and replicating it to the other side. But then you also have a recovery time objective of about 4 hours, because if there's not any kind of orchestration tools, you're gonna have to manually register virtual machines. There's a lot of work to manually get everything up and running. So you can see the impact there is about $136,000 for being down. And then there's our solution, which is Zerto, right? The disaster recovery solution for DataBank. Your RPOs are typically about 5 to 10 seconds, so 20 seconds is even being conservative here. So those are the amounts of checkpoints you can fail back to, or data loss that you'll have is 20 seconds or less. And then your recovery time objectives are about 15 minutes, and these are about average of all of our customers worldwide, right? So that little amount of downtime of being to recover from an outage, you see the impact is less than $3,000, right? And then below, you know, there's a lot of different things that can affect outages. Some of them even including just human error, right? Deleting a file by accident, deleting a virtual machine by accident, even by an admin. So that ability to be able to recover and rewind instantaneously from any point and directly back to production is what makes Zerto a unique solution. So here's many use cases that Zerto is helping our customers tackle, right? Nowadays, customers want an always-on experience, right? It's not like back in the day when you could say, hey, I just have a backup from last night. If I lose this file, just restore it from last night and we're good to go, right? Now, if we lose files that are more than, you know, minutes or hours old, we've lost a lot of revenue, especially companies that are doing credit card transactions, right? They need that always-on capability. And when they do have outages, the ability to bring things up very fast, right? So since Zerto is doing continuous data protection, we're offering the lowest recovery time objectives. You saw it was about 15 minutes. And the lowest recovery point objectives, or the amount of data that you'll lose, will be in the seconds, not minutes and hours, right? Completely automated and orchestrated. So you basically push a button after you set up a run book, deciding, you know, how you want to re-IP your virtual machines, what orders you want them to come up in the data center, and possibly even run some scripts that you've written. You set that all up ahead of time, click a few mouse clicks, and bring your virtual workloads back online in a disaster recovery site. Consolidations and migrations is a big use case, right? So with the lowest RTOs and RPOs in the industry, we enable data center consolidations without any data loss. So it's storage agnostic, right, and also hardware agnostic. So we could care less if you had, say, some hyperconverged appliance at the customer and they want to replicate into your infrastructure, which is server-based and storage-based. We don't care about any of the underlying hardware, right? So that makes it easy to be able to come in to any customer and say, hey, we can replicate your workloads into DataBank, regardless of what your underlying hardware is. And we're the only solution that's offering virtual protection groups, which are basically our consistency groups. This allows you to protect an entire application, right? So it's not just protecting single servers and then bringing them up independently and trying to recover your application. We're protecting your entire application together. So your database server, your application server, and your web server all protected as one bundle and all coming up at one identical point in time in the disaster recovery site. So, basically you can set up a whole migration of a data center, push a button and bring everything up in that data center with very low loss of data. Ransomware attacks comes up quite often now. There's predictions that the upcoming election, like that every city in America is going to get hit with ransomware. I'm in Atlanta and we got hit last year. I think it was about a $57,000 ransom. And it's predicted the city is going to spend approximately $17 million to clean up because we didn't pay the ransom. We also didn't have Zerto in place to be able to roll the entire city back, right? But imagine being hit with ransomware at noon. Somebody hits you up with an email and says, hey, pay me this, or, I'm not going to unencrypt your entire file server, right? Well, if you had Zerto in place, you literally could just roll back to 11:59 and 55 seconds ago, like 5 seconds before the ransomware hit. Bring your file server up unencrypted and not pay the ransom, right? So having those 5 to 10-second increments all the way up to 30 days gives you that granularity to be able to roll back. So sometimes, you might, 1 hour of journaling might not be sufficient. You might want to keep 1 week of journaling so that you have 7 days of those 5-second checkpoints to be able to roll back to, right? And the ability to recover files is part of the product as well. So we have failover recovery as well. You don't have to just restore an entire VM or an application. You might just have an entire, a single database file on one of your SQL servers you need to recover, right? So ransomware is one of the big ones that's going to come up, and one of the most I'd say prevalent use cases right now, just because of that ability to roll back instantaneously. So this is just showing how Zerto is automated, right? It's a unique solution. Basically, it's just 3 mouse clicks to be able to orchestrate. 1 click to choose failover the product, right? The next mouse click is just choosing that 5 to 10 second checkpoint that you want to fail over. So you'll literally, in this menu, you'll see the dates and timestamps of the last checkpoints, and you can choose which one you want to fail back to. Basically verify that you have the right checkpoint, and then click start failover. So it's like a 3-click process to start an entire disaster recovery failover. A customer is pushing this on their side or DataBank side, and their entire protected production environment is going to come up in the DataBank data center and be orchestrated the way that they need it to be, whether it be re-IPing, boot orders, or any kind of orchestration that needs to happen. This is the next slide. Is just showing you, this is just at a high level showing you that if you need to do DR testing, that you're in an isolated environment, right? So the beauty of Zerto as well is, what good is a good DR plan if like Dane mentioned, having that old binder of your DR plan that was never updated, was never tested. We have the ability not only to update the binder constantly, but also test it. So being able to push a button and test all of your applications in the DR site, not affecting production, not affecting replication, bringing up identical copies at any point that you need to. And all of this doesn't affect any of the IO that's replicating from the production side. We bring you up on what are called scratch disks, basically. So this is beautiful to be able to test that run book, to be able to test that binder, right? And then once you're done with this test and you assume like everything's working in an isolated environment, the next step is you can then dump a compliancy report. So this is beautiful too. I'm old school. I remember doing old DR tests, recovering tape from backup, and having to do Microsoft Word write-ups of the tests, and it was painful, right? Just the write-ups were painful, trying to remember all the steps that you did and the times that were taken. That's all done for you in Zerto as well. So not only have you already set up all of your orchestration and automation, At the end, you can dump a PDF compliance report telling you all the steps that were taken, exact timeframes that they happened, boot orders, anything that occurred in that run book. So the ability to kind of meet any of your regulatory requirements, but also just being a hero as the IT guy, just coming back to your boss at noon on a Wednesday and said, hey boss, I just did a full DR test of our production environment, right? And from there, I'm going to hand it over to Phil Riker from DataBank, who's going to explain DataBank's disaster recovery as a service offering for you.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for sitting through that. I think that the Zerto solution, as said earlier, is the leading solution in the market right now, and we're happy to be partnered with them and believe that it helps us build upon what we already offer and makes it an excellent offering overall. So what I want to first cover in my portion of the presentation is what is the disaster recovery as a service solution, and why is it as a service, and what do the trends show us and tell us about where the future is going here. So as we talk about the disaster recovery as a service, what I want everyone to look at is to focus on the 5 key components that make up DRaaS. And it's critical to understand these because all of them are part of the building blocks that complete the entire stack that makes up a successful DRaaS implementation. The first one being geographic separation. Obviously, because there's varying different types of disasters, some of them can be regional, you want the proper separation of your production facilities from your disaster recovery environment. And so geographic separation is critical. The facilities that your DR environment is sitting in also have to be capable of carrying the full load, the full production load, with the proper amount of network bandwidth and redundancies and resilience in place in order for you to have business continuity, to continue operations. A small closet somewhere in another building is probably not going to have the power nor the network connectivity that you need in order to be successful with a proper disaster recovery experience. Next, you need to have the right infrastructure. That infrastructure needs to be connected and running and configured and ready to take the loads. It needs to be properly spec'd so that you have the proper processing power, the proper amounts of memory, and you're prepared to literally take the switchover of whatever the current load is on your production environment and your DR environment without very much adjustment at all. The software is very critical here too, because without the software, the Zerto orchestration layer and the replication, and as pointed out, the CDP, the continuous data protection, you can't get the RTOs and RPOs that you're looking for. You want it to be easy. You want that push button functionality to make the failover as simple as possible, and that's where Zerto comes into the play here and really provides that level of sophistication that takes away a lot of the deep technical how-to and understanding, and provides you with that kind of single pane of glass to your DR environment. And then finally, you want to be able to rely on technical resources and people that you can trust that understand your environment, not just see you as your customer 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 9, but they understand that you have a very specific solution, you have specific needs, you're following a specific run book, you've declared a disaster, where are you in that declaration of a disaster, and then being able to get into the same systems and assist you if you need help troubleshooting or resolving any issues. You want someone who's fully versed and understands exactly what you're doing. So having an executable, testable, and verifiable disaster recovery plan that meets the demands of both security, compliance, uptime, and recoverability is really key here. So the big question is, why as a service, right? Well, first of all, it delivers better functionality for less cost. Pay for storage and licensing, turning VMs on only in the event of a disaster. being declared or a test with very little to no upfront cost is ideal. This allows you guys to basically have that resiliency in place for a fraction of what it would cost to build it yourself. So it's also easier. We can do it more frequently, and the testing is actually a lot less expensive. We can automate the testing through the Zerto solution and the assistance with us writing the runbooks. It's non-disruptive to your environment because you can not only can you perform a DR test, but you can actually perform a rollback too, which is unique to the Zerto offering. And all of the solutions that we provide include the testing services and the failover assistance as part of the overall offering. Of course, we offer more flexible short-term contracts with fast time to market, which gives you the ability to adapt to changing IT environments and business needs. And deployments are measured in weeks, not months or years. Again, because we're leveraging our expertise as a service provider and doing this for such a long time. And then on top of that, the Zerto product offering, it makes for a very polished and refined offering that is a lot easier to deploy. And then of course we have pay-as-you-go pricing. The resources are on demand, you pay for them when you need them. Our contracts are very flexible, and it again allows you to put a solution into place for a fraction of the cost of what it would take to do it in-house or build it yourself. So interestingly, you guys are here because you're interested in disaster recovery. Well, I'll tell you guys you're not alone, because the Storage Organizational Dynamics 2019 survey says that 26% of the respondents were already using cloud-based disaster recovery in their environments. And that level of adoption will increase to 51% in the next couple of years. And that number is probably understated given the current COVID-19 situation. We believe that the number is actually even going to be larger than that, as the study was done prior to the new world we work in today. So I want to talk about DataBank's approach to IT resilience and what our offering looks like. So when you look at comparing the disaster recovery as a service to other methods, you can really look at it in three different categories here. There's the traditional backup methodology. Then there's the DR as a service methodology. And then there's the true active-active, sometimes referred to as hot site DR, which really just means active-active. You have two different data centers that are functioning at the same time, which can take the full load of your environment. Obviously, the active-active model is very expensive because you've got double the cost for everything. The traditional backup model is very challenging because, as you can see, it makes it very difficult to hit a lot of the goals that you're trying to achieve. Your ATR and RPO outcomes are difficult to achieve. You don't really have a location and physical infrastructure ready. The people and the testing process is significant and creates a barrier to actually doing it. Planned versus unplanned. I mean, that becomes a challenge as well, because oftentimes you don't plan to do disaster recovery testing in a traditional backup model. And then of course, it doesn't meet your security and compliance requirements. A lot of security and compliance requirements, if you follow the NIST 800-53 standards, require data to exist in 3 places. And the traditional backup model doesn't really achieve that. Whereas DRaaS checks off all these boxes and is a good fit for what you're looking to do. And it fits right in the middle. It's not the cheapest solution, but it allows you to check off all these, and it's much cheaper than going the active-active or hot site model. So let's take a look at how DataBank views disaster recovery as a service. So if you look at the table here, the geodiverse replication in 19 data centers and 9 geographies. So this gives you an opportunity to choose the location that you want that geodiversity to be. It gives you many options, both East and West Coast as well as center of the United States. It ensures recoverability by adding distance between the production and the recovery sites. So it's definitely an important part of this. It's also storage and hypervisor agnostic replication. As pointed out earlier when we were reviewing Zerto, the power here is that it doesn't matter what your underlying infrastructure is. So there's no vendor lock-in, and it simplifies the process completely. It's always on too. Our systems are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And we use the CDB solution that's part of Zerto that includes journaling to ensure that you lose very minimal data and you can recover very quickly to meet whatever your corporate requirements are. And then the Zerto automation gives you that easy button that you can hit. It's simple to perform a recovery. And of course, what's included in the offering that we provide is the compute infrastructure, which includes the CPU and the memory, of course, the storage, but really important is also the annual testing, the defined SLA. We provide a service level agreement to make sure that has teeth, to make sure that the solution will do what you guys want it to do. We help in development and creation of runbooks because there's more to the failover process than just simply replicating the data. There's an entire network layer that needs to be addressed. And so we work very closely with our customers who deploy DR as a service and ensure that we have a proper runbook that defines all of the changes that need to occur at the network level to ensure a very expedient failover, to ensure that everything is working properly. Once the network changes are made, we have a set of tests that we work with you on to ensure that all of the environments come up and are working the way they're supposed to. And then we have ongoing monitoring tools that allow us to maintain the health of the environment and ensure that you're getting exactly what you're looking for in your DR solution. So a couple things I wanted to point out here. The compliance requirements that most companies have, and both the customization process and procedure. Those are pretty critical, right? Those are portions of the solution that most other solutions that you look at in the market right now don't have that holistic approach. They're not complete in the product offering or the full stack solution. So if you look at what our solution includes, it's a single platform. It includes the replication recovery from a geographically separate data center. It includes all of the infrastructure that's needed. It includes the network communications layer and the replication solver, obviously, with Zerto. And then, again, as I've pointed out earlier, the engineering and support expertise. We've been doing this for a long time. And so it's backed by the engineering teams that have put this together for countless other organizations and have experience doing this on a pretty regular basis with most of our customers and performing the active testing with them. It includes the testing procedure, failover, failback, and the entire automation package. So we walk you through all steps of that, including setting up the VPGs on an application basis to ensure that the number of servers, when those servers should be recovered, in what order, what the boot sequence looks like, all of that stuff is included as part of that. We also include the compliance enablement. We have a full stack of security tools that we place on top of the infrastructure that allow us to meet the security and audit readiness of most organizations. Again, we use our driving, the driving guidelines that we use come out of the NIST 800-53 document, which allows us to meet FedRAMP compliance among many other different compliance requirements. Of course, we have also 24-hour-a-day available network operations center resources and support teams that are there to help out. You just literally pick up the phone and give us a call, and we actually answer the phone here in the United States, and we'll be able to provide you with assistance during all hours of the day and night. And then, of course, as part of the offering, you also have a portal which gives you visibility and control over your environment. So if you want to perform self-service DR events, you can do so on your own by just going in and doing the three-click process that was reviewed in the Zerto solution. All of that equates to revenue portability. So let's talk a little bit about the implementation and the migration plan from your current environment, whether you are using a current DR solution, whether it's homegrown or another outsourced solution, or you don't have one at all. What does that look like? So there are different steps in that process. The very first step is the plan. And as part of the planning process, we like to learn what the customer's requirements are. It's a very consultative approach. We talk to you about what your expectations are, defining the scope and understanding what your needs are as a business. We evaluate the existing platform to understand what you're doing today and how what is working and what isn't, and what those challenges are. We learn your systems and how your operations work. And we create an implementation strategy, and that's led by a project manager and implementation engineers that are all focused on making sure that we have a plan for success. Once we have a plan in place, we jump into the design process. This is where we engineer the optimal solution. We validate and document the environment design, and we remediate where we find gaps in the plan, and we configure monitoring and document recovery for each system and application at that point. That's where the design around the protection groups and the boot sequence and what has to happen at the network layer is all put into the plan and designed. And then we build. We build the environment, we coordinate the efforts with your vendors. We have a checklist that we go through to ensure that the solution meets all of the quality standards that we have built over the years of doing this. We configure all the monitoring for the application so that we know the health of everything. That's key because we have a very proactive model, which I'll review in a future slide here, about getting in front of issues before they become problems and solving them before you guys are even aware of them, actually. We create runbooks and recovery procedures based upon the plan and the design that we put into place. And we validate your test case scenarios. And then we help you guys with the scheduling the cutover and the go live of the solution. Then, of course, we jump into the testing phase. And the testing, no disaster recovery solution is complete until you've actually tested it and made sure that it works properly. So in that process, we review the test with you and go through and make sure that the test is going to properly indicate that you can successfully fail over and not. Obviously, there are critical parts of your infrastructure that you want to test. In some cases, some customers test everything, the entire failover. In other cases, customers only want to test portions of their environment. But again, we'll work with you on that, on whatever type of interval you'd like to do that. Some customers do that quarterly, some are once a year, some are every couple of years. It really just depends on your particular business needs. We also help in some additional things that we do is we advise you on how to resync data in your applications properly. We write scripts to automate the cutover steps. So scripting is part of this, which is very valuable for a lot of customers because that usually represents a challenge, a technical challenge that a lot of IT departments are not equipped to handle, is writing effective scripts to ensure that Zerto, as well as the network layer and other portions of the turnup, happen effectively. We also ensure that the performance requirements are met. We make sure that you have the proper infrastructure on the DR side to meet the processing and the disk space and disk I/O requirements that your solution is going to need when you're in a DR environment. Of course, then we provide assistance when you lost the solution and I mean when you launch your solution, and then we help transition you to our support operations. Along with all of this comes training for your staff to ensure that they understand how the runbook works, how to get a hold of us if there's a problem, and what to do in the event that you do declare a disaster and what that process looks like. So what really helps, besides the the deep knowledge when it comes to compliance and security that DataBank offers that really sets us apart from a lot of the competitors and creates a lot of uniqueness for us. I think the other approach that the proactive approach that we take for incident management is another thing that really creates a lot of uniqueness for DataBank and sets us apart from our competition. If you look at other hosting providers and how they handle this, this chart is a really great representative of this. If you look at the lower half of the chart, what most customers are used to is that the customer detects an issue, and then they call the support team, and then they speak to an engineer, and the engineer tries to resolve the problem, and if they can, it gets escalated to tier 2. Then tier 2 has got to troubleshoot it. And then there's a resolution that happens. In the meantime, what's transpired over that period of time, anywhere from 30 minutes to a couple hours, is that you're in a position where whatever it is you're trying to get assistance on has been down or is not functioning the way it's supposed to. It's a reactive response. Whereas DataBank takes a completely different approach here. 95% of server alarms are resolved with no or very limited customer interaction. We take the time up front to put the monitoring in place and the health checks in place to allow us to be able to get access to or to understand when you guys are having an issue and resolve that issue prior to you even knowing about it. In many, many cases, our customers wake up the next morning and they'll check their email and see that something did occur on their SQL database server that required the SQL database server to simply be restarted, or it required a web server to be restarted. And you'll note that the monitoring alert went off, and 3 minutes later, the DataBank staff responded to it by following the runbook actions and completing the task to bring the servers back online, all without your interaction at all. That's huge for a lot of businesses. On top of that, 70% of all tickets and actions initiated by DataBank automated systems or proactive support operations are handled. So what this translates into is that we're taking the burden of having to monitor and keep your systems healthy out of your hands and puts it into the hands of our support team to ensure that the concept of you guys having a good night's sleep and waking up the next morning and knowing that everything is working properly is actually going to happen versus the old model traditionally where you have to discover an issue and then you have to call into the support department and help them understand what the issues are and then go through a couple hours of troubleshooting to resolve that problem. So it's a huge benefit that we can provide our customers and really what sets DataBank apart. All right, well, I'm going to turn it back over to Dane. If you guys have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat and be happy to answer questions about specifically our solution. But Dane, give it to you.
Thank you, Phil. I'd like to thank you, Robert and John, everyone. And we'd like to thank everybody for attending. We hope you came away with some useful tips, some good ideas. If you have questions, now is the time to ask. And if you're wondering if this is right for your business, maybe you're concerned about justifying the cost or you'd like a free assessment, for a limited time, we are offering a free assessment. It is first come, first served. Our support staff can only handle so many of these. So as you can imagine, we want to do a good job. We want to do it right, but we can only do so many. So if you're interested in that, please let us know. We can also assist you with justifying it from a cost perspective, maybe help you identify the resources you need to protect or help you better understand the security and compliance implications for your organization. So feel free to reach out to us at webinars@databank.com. Should you have any questions, you want the recording or anything else. Looks like we do have a couple of questions coming in. So let me go ahead and try to field the ones that that I think I can field and the ones that the other guys can field will let them do that. So does DRaaS and this process include all the reporting that you showcased earlier, or is that extra? No, it is included. So that was a simple yes or no. And it looks like we have actually 2 or 3 people that are actually looking to get started. So we'll follow up with you. Any other questions? Phil, let me have you handle this because this is more of a technical. Somebody said, hey, I know there's very different DR situations out there, but when you migrate, approximately how much time does it take to implement something like this?
Well, I think
how much is a house, right?
But it's a great question. And I always like, here's how I like to address this question, is that I'm sure that a lot of people have moved before. And every time you move, once you get into the house you moved into, you're after going through all that, you say, oh, I'm never going to go through this again. This is the last place I'm going to live in, because it's always such a pain in the neck. And it's one of the most stressful things that you can do. Well, implementing a DR solution can be very stressful, but we have done this so many times. And with the Zerto software that we use, it's actually quite simple. It's just a matter of installing some of the ZVMs, some of the Zerto products in the customer side, performing the replication, and then doing a test. I mean, I'm simplifying it, but those are, the three major categories that have to occur. And of those 3 major categories, probably the most time-consuming portion of it is the actual replication of the data. So it really comes down to how much data do you need to replicate. So if, let's say that your entire protected data set is 10 terabytes, well then the time that it's going to take for us to replicate 10 terabytes is going to help define how long the overall project is going to take. But I can say in general, the process is weeks, not multiple months for most customers. On some of the larger deals, it's been a couple months, but it's usually generally no longer than that. So it is a much more refined solution and is much quicker to implement.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, maybe my experience in this is that it really is incumbent upon the IT department to kind of go to the management team and make sure that you know that your goals are aligned in doing what you're doing. The technical aspects of it really aren't all that difficult to do, but you want to make sure that whatever you're trying to accomplish aligns with the goals and of the objectives of the organization. That's where I've seen things fall off course most in the past. Well, it looks like we're kind of coming up on the hour here, and we don't have any other questions. So this concludes our webinar today. Stay safe, stay secure, and hope to see you next time around.